The old bus station was crowded with people rushing towards somewhere important, but one quiet figure sitting alone on a worn-out wooden bench seemed completely invisible to the world. Her hands trembled as she held a torn backpack close to her chest. Her clothes were clean but faded, and her eyes carried the exhausted look of someone who had cried until there were no tears left. The afternoon sun shined brightly across the pavement, yet she looked colder than anyone standing in the winter. Then she softly whispered the words that would change 2 lives forever. She said she had nowhere left to go, and without thinking about the consequences, I heard myself answering that she could stay with me. At that moment, I had no idea that one simple act of kindness would rewrite both of our futures forever. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can change someone's life, please take a moment to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share this story with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Storyverse for more emotional stories that remind us humanity still exists. My name is Rowan Mercer, and I had spent the last 7 years believing that loneliness was simply another part of adulthood. I worked as a furniture craftsman in a quiet town where people knew each other but rarely knew what anyone was carrying inside. My small house sat near the edge of town surrounded by tall oak trees, and after losing my mother and later my younger brother in separate tragedies, silence had become my closest companion. Every morning I built tables, chairs, and shelves with my hands, but every evening I returned to an empty home where only the ticking clock reminded me that time was still moving. That afternoon I had traveled into the city to deliver a handcrafted dining table to a customer. The job finished earlier than expected, and instead of driving home immediately, I stopped at the station cafe for coffee. It was there that I noticed the young woman sitting alone for nearly 2 hours. People walked around her as though she didn't exist. Some glanced at her before quickly looking away. Others assumed she was simply waiting for someone. But I noticed something different. Nobody was coming for her. As the station slowly emptied, I finally walked over and gently asked whether she was all right. She looked up with frightened eyes, almost expecting me to chase her away like everyone else had. Her voice barely rose above a whisper as she explained that her name was Mireya Sloan. She had left the apartment she shared with relatives after months of emotional abuse. They had blamed her for everything that went wrong, controlled every decision she made, and eventually threw her out after accusing her of being nothing but a burden. She had no savings because they controlled her income, no friends nearby because they had isolated her for years, and no place willing to accept her that night. The words she spoke weren't dramatic. They were quiet, almost empty. She simply admitted that she had nowhere left to go. Those words struck something deep inside me because I remembered feeling exactly the same after burying my brother years earlier. I remembered standing in a cemetery wondering where people were supposed to go when life erased every familiar place. Before fear or common sense could interrupt me, I quietly answered that if she truly had nowhere safe, she could stay in my guest room until she figured things out. She stared at me for several long seconds. Trust was difficult for someone whose trust had been broken repeatedly. I understood why she hesitated. After all, strangers rarely offered genuine kindness anymore. Eventually she nodded with cautious gratitude. The drive home was almost silent except for soft music playing through the radio and occasional questions about simple things like favorite foods or hobbies. Little by little the tension left her shoulders. When we arrived, my modest home looked ordinary, but to her it felt like a palace because it offered something she hadn't experienced in years: safety. She stood in the doorway almost afraid to step inside. I showed her the guest bedroom, fresh towels, clean blankets, and told her she was free to lock the door if it made her feel more comfortable. She looked around the room before quietly thanking me in a voice that almost disappeared. The following morning sunlight poured through the kitchen windows as I prepared breakfast. I expected awkward silence, but instead Mireya offered to help wash dishes. Over the next several days she insisted on contributing however she could. She cleaned, organized shelves, cooked meals using whatever ingredients we had, and even planted flowers in the neglected garden outside. The house that had once echoed with loneliness slowly began to feel alive again. Still, emotional wounds don't disappear simply because someone finds shelter. Many nights I noticed her waking from nightmares. Sometimes she apologized for existing, as though taking up space itself required forgiveness. Every compliment I gave her seemed impossible for her to believe. Years of cruel words had convinced her she deserved nothing better. One afternoon I invited her into my workshop. She watched me carefully shape a block of walnut into a beautiful rocking chair. I handed her a small piece of wood and showed her how every rough surface could become smooth with enough patience. She smiled for the first time without forcing it. Soon she began helping with sanding, polishing, and eventually designing small wooden decorations. Customers loved her creativity, and many specifically requested items she designed. As weeks turned into months, our little workshop became busier than ever. Orders arrived from neighboring towns, and the business slowly expanded beyond anything I had imagined. Yet the greatest transformation wasn't financial. It happened inside both of us. The quiet sadness that had lived inside my home for years slowly disappeared, replaced by laughter over burned pancakes, conversations during evening walks, and peaceful afternoons working side by side. Not everyone supported the arrangement. Some neighbors whispered that I had been foolish to trust a stranger. Others suggested Mireya was only pretending to be grateful until she could take advantage of me. Their judgment hurt, but neither of us allowed it to define our choices. Kindness often attracts suspicion because too many people have forgotten what genuine compassion looks like. Then one sunny afternoon everything changed again. A luxury black SUV stopped outside the workshop. An older woman stepped out carrying tears in her eyes. She introduced herself as Eleanor, Mireya's former elementary school teacher. After years of searching through community organizations and public records, she had finally found her. Eleanor explained that she had tried to help when Mireya disappeared from school years earlier but had lost contact after the family moved away. She had never stopped wondering whether the shy little girl who loved drawing trees had survived. The emotional reunion left everyone crying. Eleanor revealed something Mireya had never known. Before passing away, her late grandmother had created a modest education fund intended only for Mireya. Because nobody knew where she was, the money had remained untouched for years. It wasn't enough to make someone wealthy, but it was enough to pay for college or start a small business. For the first time in many years, Mireya realized her future wasn't controlled by the people who had hurt her. She enrolled in design courses while continuing to help in the workshop. Her confidence grew with every passing month. She no longer apologized before speaking. She laughed freely. She made friends. She discovered dreams that had been buried beneath years of fear. Watching her transformation reminded me that healing isn't something another person gives you. Sometimes all someone needs is one safe place, one person who believes them, and one chance to begin again. Nearly 2 years after that afternoon at the bus station, our workshop hosted an open house celebrating its expansion into a community learning center where young people facing homelessness or family hardship could learn woodworking and practical skills free of charge. We wanted others to experience the same second chance that had changed our lives. People from across the county attended. Some brought donations. Others volunteered. Several former students found stable jobs after completing our training program. Every smiling face became proof that compassion multiplies when shared. Near sunset, as golden light filled the workshop windows, Mireya quietly stood beside me watching families laugh together. She admitted she sometimes wondered what would have happened if I had simply walked past her that day like everyone else. I honestly didn't know the answer, and I didn't want to imagine it. All I knew was that one decision made in less than 5 seconds had created hundreds of new opportunities for people neither of us had even met yet. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Storyverse. Your support helps us continue bringing meaningful stories of hope, compassion, and humanity to people around the world.